refills your inner reservoir of resiliency. Because one of the challenges in life is that as you get older and as we're living in a world with all kinds of challenges, we have to have an awful lot of resiliency and ability to adapt in order to be able to address effectively the challenges in our life. So take a couple, about just a minute or two, and write a list down what refills your inner reservoir of resiliency. So inside of us, we all have a bucket of resiliency. I mean, some of you might think in terms of it's a car, or that you have your tires filled up, or you have your boat. If it's a boat, you're thinking you have enough buoyancy in your boat. But for ease of drawing, I'm going to talk about the challenges and our ability to meet those challenges in our life. So one of the things that really help us when we need to deal with more traumas, or even deal with things like moving to a new place in our, to a new house or to a new job, is that if we have done some education. So that's not just looking up, taking a class on PTSD, or it's not just reading books or looking at YouTube. Part of the education we do to make us more resilient, to be able to not have cognitive distortions, and to be really effective in dealing with challenges, is to expand our worldview. Oftentimes, if you have a very small worldview, you tend to not be able to see other options. You're not able to come up with different ways of doing things. You have a pretty narrow view of the world. But with education, if you're going driving across country or taking trips somewhere else, or you're talking with people who are not like you, or if you're looking back at your life and thinking, how did I do this? And I think I'm going to explore what was really happening in 1960, like looking at documentaries. What it does is it starts expanding your worldview. So when you're facing a challenge or a decision, or you're looking at some way to be more effective, you have all of these different pieces of information and ways to check your cognitive distortions. Part of that is also building skills. When you have education, you're building new skills. The challenge, though, for many of us is we take a class or we read something, or we go, oh, that was a really good book, or we watch a movie, and then we just forget the skills. We don't practice them. We don't try them out again. And one of the challenges with PTSD, or with just aging, is that we need to keep our brains active, but we also need to make sure that we are practicing those skills. Like with the cognitive distortions, if we don't look at them and check them and practice them all the time, what ends up happening is that we go, oh, I forgot about that. And we're not using them in the way we need to. Part of being resilient is the supports that we have for ourselves. You know, the idea, if you are a friend, it's easy to make friends. We tend to isolate ourselves oftentimes as we get older, and certainly with the COVID situation. So it takes a little bit more creative ways to generate support for ourselves, whether it's being in online groups, actually doing Zooms, calling people up, but making a significant effort to have support. Another part of our resiliency is physical well-being. Now, we're not going to have 38-year-old hot, strong bodies at our age, but physical well-being is possible at any age. That means doing things like, do you brush your teeth? Did you get a new toothbrush? Did you not use the same toothbrush? Are you making your doctor's appointments, your dentist appointments? Part of physical well-being is, are you doing those physical exercises that the physical therapist told you how to do 2 months ago? Part of it is also being safe. Is your home safe? Are you leaving things out where you're going to trip? Because that takes a lot of energy to be aware and tripping and balancing and falling. Or if you're in a domestic violence situation, that's going to take, it's going to impair your resiliency. So having physical well-being is all of those things that help you to be strong and healthy throughout your life, all the phases of your life. Another of those is, are you eating and sleeping well? Now, I don't know about you, but when I only have 5 hours of sleep, or if I'm eating too many carbs, or if I am not eating enough, I tend to not be nearly as effective. My resiliency in the face of change is very, very difficult. Another part of being resilient is actually showing appreciation for the things that are around you and being intentionally grateful. There's that study, I think I might have mentioned that before, that when in a retirement home, they were looking at why were some people tending to be depressed, and there was a group of people that were actually doing really well, that were feeling pretty effective and not depressed as they grew older. And what it was this issue of being grateful and being appreciative. Instead of looking at the things they lost, what they did is they looked at the things they still had. And it helped with their resiliency as they grew older. Another part of it is creativity and imagination. So people that are creative, not just going for a walk or are doing artwork or writing poems or reading books, but the creativity of being able to, in a moment, go, oh, stopping and looking and appreciating things, and then having an imagination, saying, oh, I wonder what that would be like if I did this with it. Or I wonder if it would be like if I could share that with somebody else. It's the idea of bringing beauty into your life when it's dark, but also imagining possibilities. And that certainly are two skills that help you in problem solving, as you can imagine. If you're creative, you can look at different ways of doing things. If you're imaginative, you can imagine probabilities and possibilities as well, too. One of the things that happen over life is that we have challenges. And I'm not just going to put it as things like forest fires or being raped or child abuse. We have all kinds of challenges in life. Now, some of these challenges, like a death, they will eat down into our resiliency. So maybe a child has died, or a friend has died, or a family member has died. And you might find yourself not eating as well. You might find yourself not taking care of yourself physically. And your resiliency takes this dip. And you're feeling like you're just pretty exhausted. But over time, if you are filling back in with your creativity, working on eating well and sleeping well, you'll find that you're starting to go up again. Your resiliency is recovering. Now, some people at this time may say to you, why don't you get over it? It's been 5 months. How come you're still upset about your child being taken away? Because the child's back with you. Or why are you upset about having to move and leave your friends? It's been a while. You're adapting. You're looking good. And particularly with a death, they may say, time to get on with it. Well, when it ends up happening, you may actually start recovering your resiliency, but you're always going to have a little bit of this emotional limp. So that at different times during your life or during the year, you find yourself not quite as strong. Your resiliency maybe takes a little bit of a dip. Other times we have other traumas that happen. Maybe it's a rape, maybe it's a fire, maybe it's poverty, maybe you've lost your job and you are no longer able to pay your bills. In our case, maybe it's COVID, maybe it's the fact that you're being isolated. Certainly a big one happening for many people is the political situation right now. And all of a sudden, your resiliency starts taking some real hits. Maybe you got some gaps here, and maybe you have some other gaps over here. You're really not taking good care of yourself. You're not eating well. You're not using any of those skills at all. And pretty soon you're finding that your resiliency is pretty down and you're pretty darn exhausted. So we get over here, and if you have not worked on repairing all these holes in your support systems and in your education, in your family systems, you've kind of just gotten exhausted. Sometimes what people do is they create some substitute or some, I would say, faux resiliency, some other ways of doing things. So for example, if you have been really effective and got a lot of, in the normal times, a lot of sense of effectiveness from your job, you may find what you're starting to do, because all of the other parts of your resiliency are taking hits, is you're doing overwork. You're not just doing your work and getting some joy from it, you're overworking. Maybe what you're doing is substituting for resiliency. You're starting to maybe eat too much. Carb eating, you know, eating when you're really stressed, getting some carbs in you can calm you down. You may find yourself starting to use drugs. Maybe at first all it is that you're using some alcohol. You're not you're using it at the end of the day, you're taking a drink, but pretty soon after a while you're starting taking more and more. Maybe part of what you're doing is you're taking some risks. Instead of just going rock climbing, you're going, oh, I'm going to take more and more risks because you want to avoid thinking about all of these traumas. What you're trying to do, because your resiliency, you're not able to bounce back like you normally do. So normally with a good resiliency, you can bounce back when these challenges happen. When you can't bounce back, what sometimes people are doing is they're trying to block it all out. They don't want to think about the death. They don't want to think about the illness or the child abuse or the COVID or the job changes. What we have is there's a couple words for it, is psychogenic numbing. What they may be doing in taking a lot of risks is I'm going to jack up my emotions. I'm going to feel like all my thoughts and my feelings are climbing that mountain, or maybe working really, really hard. Or if you're a veteran, part of it may be that you're watching some movies that are about Vietnam, because I'm going to get myself numbed by watching all these things. I'm going to not think about all the traumas in my situation. Sometimes though, in this is when you have trauma or you're not using your resiliency effectively, is you find yourself looking for something. You're looking for something different and you're substituting it. You're not sure what it is. So you're overworking, overeating, taking risks. You may be dissociating, denying. You're looking for something. You don't know what it is. So you keep substituting these other forms of resiliency, forms of basically numbing, so that you're not present. The challenge is when you've had trauma, sometimes what you're finding is people have impaired self-protection. So you are not looking at what the challenges are, what the risks are. So there is, for an example, in the child welfare situation, we oftentimes would get caseworkers who came into child welfare almost, I don't know what the word is, kind of like stealing therapy. In other words, they're going to go into child welfare, learn all about child abuse and trauma and domestic violence, and in the process heal some of the hurts they have already. They come in here with this impaired resiliency already. They have big gaps in their resiliency, and they're thinking that the job is going to fill it in for them. So at first that really works because they're taking classes, they're getting some support because they're meeting with other people, and it's really exciting. And for a while, they're not taking care of themselves, but for a while they're getting some feedback and a feeling of effectiveness. But pretty soon over time, that starts wearing away at them. And what we end up finding these people doing is starting to use drugs. They're, instead of drinking, having a drink with their friends late at night, they're ending up going home and drinking more. And instead of working 9 to 5 and coming home feeling, I feel so effective, I did this really well and I learned things, they start working 12 and 14 hours, and they come home and they work more and more. They come in, I'd come into work and I'd see them working on a Saturday, I'm working on a Sunday. And they'd say, and they excuse it, saying, oh, this child needs me, I've got to do this, I'm going to work harder. So instead of actually taking care of themselves, what they're doing is using their job, they're using their risks, and they're using the drugs and other things to keep the trauma away from them. What ends up happening with these people is that they are finding themselves becoming more and more exhausted. And in one particular worker I had, she ended up having to take a leave from her job because she was so exhausted. She had more and more and more sick leave. For being at the top of the line work, she's having more sick leave. So these kind of substitute ways to numb yourself from all the traumas and the losses and the new things going on, all of a sudden you're having maybe you're having a job loss. Maybe what they're having now is illness. Some of them may be finding that they're using sex. They didn't have any healthy relationships, so they're getting into multiple relationships with other people. Some of them are now starting to, I had a couple ladies that quit. They were just so exhausted, they quit their job. And then what ends up, there's this spiraling down that happens. I met one of the caseworkers later who had finally quit her job, and she was drinking. She was using other things to numb herself. And all of a sudden, all of those traumas that she was having pushed away were starting to break through. She was having partial flashbacks. She was dissociating. She was finding herself just completely overwhelmed. She said, I hadn't thought about that for years. I thought I was okay with it. And so she was basically, she was in this really, really difficult space. And her first thought was, can I come back to work? I know I felt so much better when I was at work. And we had a conversation about maybe what you need to be doing is looking at some of your resiliency, some of the issues that you've had before, and building them up. So going back here, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. What she had done between her work and the traumas, she had basically shrunk all of her resiliency down to probably this little bit of a bar here. And she'd added to it with all these ineffective ways of trying to numb herself. So she got rid of the drugs and alcohol. She did some treatment, but you ever heard the term a dry alcoholic? They have all of the affects, they have all of the behaviors. They've gotten rid of the drugs or alcohol, but they're still doing criminal behavior. They're still doing the cognitive distortions. They're still isolating or becoming angry. They're basically away from the drugs, but they haven't worked on all of the trauma issues, their distortions, their feelings. And their resiliency that was replaced by other forms of work and drugs had never been rejuvenated, never been refilled. And that's not so unusual for us in our older ages. We have had fewer and fewer ways as you get older to rebuild back our family support systems. Our family members are dying. We're not necessarily seeing our friends as in the same way, particularly now, as we used to. So the idea of going down to Ollie, having a class, meeting outside in the quad, having discussions, going to a class, and having 5 of you going out to coffee, that is less now because people are not finding those same ways. Some of us may not be because of physical ailments. We haven't figured out how to improve our physical well-being. And we haven't maybe looked at enough opportunity to work on our creativity and imagination because all of our focus has been on healing ourselves or being isolated or not getting hugs or dealing with COVID. So one of the things I talked to this lady about, this caseworker, when she, a former caseworker, said, before I even consider rehiring you, I want you to go back and look at all these factors in your life and see what you're doing. Do a map and see what you can do to improve those areas, because you'll never be able to effectively work in child welfare when you're hearing about kids being burned, you're hearing about family members that are leaving their children behind, about drugs and alcohol. Those things are going to still be there. And your family problems are still going to be there, and definitely the world problems are going to still be there. If you have not improved these areas of your life, you may find that you do not have any capacity to live well. Well, that's the same with us as older. In our older ages, we need to be more creative to figure out what at age 50, 60, 70, or 80, given our life circumstances, given our world that we're in, how do we improve our support systems, our education, and our family supports? So one of the things before I turn this over, we're going to take a little bit of a break. What I'd like you to look at over the next week is make a chart for yourself. And you can do it with art, or you can do it with writing. And you might want to label it that this is your support system. And think in terms of how am I going to expand this support system in this type of area right now? And not saying things like, I can't, I should have called her back. No, you try to avoid those cognitive distortions or the catastrophizing and say, what is it that I can do right now to improve my support systems? And the same thing with, maybe it's with your physical. Now, we're not going to be able to do it all, because the idea of being perfect and doing it all is a real challenge and might let you up, feed you into the shoulds. Oh, I should do all my PT exercises. Really look logically and maybe in just steps. What are the things that I can do to rebuild my resiliency? Because right now we are in an era and a time, and it's going to be more so given the fact that we're all getting older, that we need to be really creative and imaginative to rebuild our support systems. Because I guarantee that, like me, you're going to face deaths. You're going to have families, members that die. You may face some illnesses. We may have some challenges in our world. And if we're going to meet them, or we're going to be able to bounce back, we need to have really strong resiliency systems. Okay.